My name is Chris Odongo. I will be your facilitator and master of ceremony for the day. I'd like you to turn to the person who's seated next to you, give them a handshake and welcome them to this event.
In 2017, Italy exported to Kenya 182 million euros, products for 182 millions, and Kenya exported to Italy products amounting to 54 million euros. So there is a lot of space to fill this imbalance. So it's up to you. To the 20 enterprises that will benefit from the project, I would like to remind you that the success of this project shall depend on you. It shall depend on your ability to remain focused on your dream, goals and ambition on which your companies are founded on. To conclude my remarks, it is my hope that the partnership models foreseen between public and private Italian institutions of higher learning and local partners can be replicated to improve the effectiveness and maximize the impact of public resources devoted to development, and that the good practices which will come out of this project can be taken up and to be spread to other sectors of this country and the African continent as a whole. Thank you, Asante Sana.
In 2015, I had some meeting with very important entrepreneurs in Italy, and they understood that our methodology was unique, and that this could be also a political, a social novelty for our country. So they joined us, and it was possible to create the E4Impact Foundation. E4Impact was the name of the project and became the name of the foundation.
Enterprise for Social Impact, E4Impact, should be a point of hope for the new generations of people. Because we are concerned not only about, let us say, financial or economic efficiency, but about social impact. Impact. And social impact means particularly assuring job creations. Each one of us should say, or should ask himself or herself, each entrepreneur, how many jobs I am providing.
And I think that the basis of E4Impact has been well chosen because, Your Excellency, Kenyan youth, and in particular entrepreneurs, are the most resourceful. No matter where you go, in the remotest parts of this country, tiny village, young people are resourceful, they're creative, they're creating things to sell, they're promoting small enterprise. And indeed, this is a very unique quality, a unique capacity that exists within the richness of our youth.
And when we were thinking about our accelerator, because also the incubation acceleration space is something that is taking, it's growing in Kenya and East Africa and Africa in general. So we wanted to think what could be our distinctiveness, what could make us unique, what is the difference between us and another accelerator, for instance. And we thought about two things. One was being part of the Big Four agenda of the current government. So we were looking at enterprises that are responding to that Big Four agenda. So that is construction, housing, health, and agri-food. So we were looking at that, and we would be part of the agenda of what the government is building. The other one was the link with Italy. So this is another specific distinction that we want to have as an accelerator. And so we were looking also at companies that would benefit the most with the support and link with Italian enterprises.
I declare the center officially open. Let us give a big round of applause.
We're joined today by three panelists. One is joining us virtually. I just want to confirm that Professor Ndemo is logged in. And as they set that up, I'd like to introduce the rest of my panelists. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this last shift. We hope our energy will keep you engaged. We're looking forward to having a very lively discussion on the policy and how it affects entrepreneur support organizations, and in particular, the startup bill. So joining me today is Victor, CEO of Viva Consult, and I'll give him a moment to introduce himself before I introduce the next panelist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. My name is Victor Otieno. I represent a company called Viva Consult. So Viva Consult is an SME and startup research and consultancy that focuses on sub-Saharan Africa. So we do research at two levels: at firm level, in terms of helping startups and SME make good meaning out of the data they collect, to help them make better decisions. We also help ESOs, which are entrepreneurship support organizations, in terms of trying to use data to help them interact better with SMEs, as well as data and research that is used for policy conversations. Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Victor. Up next is our second panelist, Gladys Kivati, who is Executive Director of Sustainable Business Consulting, a sustainability consulting and ESG advisory firm headquartered in Nairobi. Welcome, Gladys. You can tell us a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you, ASSEK, for having me today. As Anne has just said, my name is Gladys Kivati. We run a sustainability and ESG. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance advisory. And what we mainly do is support businesses integrate sustainability into their strategy, as well as redesign their business model to look at the triple bottom line. The triple bottom line here stands for a business making profit, but also having practices and operations that look into social impact as well as environmental impact, and take into consideration the cognizant of the global pandemic and what is happening globally in issues to do with climate change. Businesses have been affected adversely. So what we do is we support businesses think of all these factors that can impact their businesses negatively and help them come up with strategies that are sustainable and they can be able to sustain their operations and be resilient.
Thank you so much, Gladys. So our third panelist is Professor Bitang Ndemo. He'll be joining us shortly as they set up the tech. And while we do that, maybe we just start and open up this discussion. There's been a very lively discussion on the startup bill. It was gazetted just recently, and there's been discussions and community engagements and feedback on the startup bill. What does the startup bill mean for you as organizations that are supporting entrepreneurs and startups? We can start with Victor, and then we head off to Gladys.
Yeah, so thank you very much. And I think the backdrop under which the startup bill conversation started is, number one is Kenya is a very innovative nation. And this is evidenced, and we've seen evidence around the same, like for example, in 2019, we had around 17% of venture capital funding coming to Africa being taken up by Kenyan startups. We've seen, Kenya top in terms of, being a very innovative country, and this is evidenced by, Global Innovation Index, where I think Kenya is around, and I think number 2. So of course, we are seeing a lot of innovation. We are seeing a lot of potential and talent in Kenya. So it's only logical for for government through legislation to be able to support this kind of institutions to be able to really spur economic development. That's number one. Number two, I think also is if you look at the economic trajectory of Kenya, we have SMEs being the major contributors to socioeconomic development. Yeah, so we have around 98% of all businesses currently are SMEs. We have SMEs contributing 33% to GDP. SMEs employing over 30% of the population. But of course, SMEs can only do so much, and there are challenges that are there in regards to SMEs. So I think from where I sit is I see startup bill and startups being or acting as the next economic frontier for for socioeconomic development in Kenya.
All right, thank you, Victor. How about you, Gladys? What are your thoughts on the startup bill?
Yeah, so my thoughts, the startup bill actually provides a legislative framework that is aimed to foster a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, especially within the startup ecosystem. And what it mainly seeks to achieve is to govern all the ecosystem players that are aimed at, ensuring that startups are actually operating in an enabling environment. And some of these actors, ecosystem actors, are investors, incubators. We realize that the incubator landscape has changed. We recently launched a report that was looking at the landscape of incubators and accelerators in East Africa. And we realized there's been a very growth in terms of incubators opening up, especially in Kenya. And what this bill does is being able to govern the incubation centers that are set up and also being able to govern the startups that are being set up. And mostly, I think it's a win for startups in a way that it provides incentives and also it provides an opportunity for startups to formally register, because we have a clear understanding what an SME is and what is a step that an SME requires to follow for registration, but we don't really have a clear framework on startups. So this actually provides a legal framework on the ways in which a startup is governed and some of the support system that a startup can actually utilize for them to grow by utilizing the incubation programs that will be set up in the county governments. And we are seeing a move for decentralizing ecosystem support. And we realize as most of us I know who are listening, they've played a role in the ecosystem, especially the startup and the SGB ecosystem. We realize that there's a lot of focus, especially on the urban centers when it comes to providing support to businesses. But with this bill, it provides an opportunity for the county government to work closely with the national government to formalize incubation centers and to ensure that support is reaching every startup at the county level. And I see with the challenges that the startups face to do with market access, to do with access to financial resources, what the bill proposes is being able to set up more of credit schemes that startups can be able to access some of this financial support from financial institutions. We're also seeing there being an opportunity to facilitate investor discussions and bringing on board partners who can actually support startups grow and enhancing the innovation ecosystem. So I think it's a win for startups. The challenge or the call upon all the ecosystem players is how do we actually make it work? And we are really optimistic, even as we discuss this bill, that everyone has a goodwill to ensure that all the ecosystem players play a key role in ensuring that the startups are supported.
I like that. I think one of the things we've found as we've started this whole engagement process around the startup bill and policies in general is everyone is always looking at what's in it for me, what's the process of getting in, why now, why is this relevant? And so I'm really hoping that in this discussion, we can open up that conversation and make people even ask from the diaspora, even and those joining us virtually, what are the key concerns that you have on this process, how you'd like us to address them as well. So let's start with the biggest question. Startups are asking, what's in it for me? Entrepreneur support organizations like the hubs and the accelerators and the incubators are asking, what's in it for me? What's in it for them?
Yeah, so given that I am heavily involved in I continue to be heavily involved in the process, I think three things. Number one is, in terms of objectives, number one is to be able to recognize startups If you look at the way government is structured, is government only allocates resources on entities or sectors that are already identified and are already anchored in law. So currently, for instance, we have SMEs being anchored in the MSME Act 2012. So it's easier for government to have conversations around the same, given that they're already recognized in law. So it means that's number one in terms of resource allocation in general. Number two is being recognized in law gives you the opportunity for government again to collect data around the sector. So if you look at the current, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics data, it collects information around SME. So for example, right now I know from the last data collected around MSME, we have around 7.4 million SMEs in Kenya, with I think around 70% of them, 79% of them being informal. So it's easier to make decisions around SMEs because you already have data around SMEs. So I think that the first port of call for this bill is to be able to recognize startups in law, after which they can be able to access resources and can be able to be aligned or mainstreamed in terms of data collection. Number two, I think in terms of objectives is after recognition, and given the fact that we know the potential of Kenyan startups, and we've mentioned this, in 2017, for instance, we have around 17% of all venture capital coming into Africa going to Kenyan startups. That's a significant number, despite the lack of government support for startups. So the question you imagine if you are to support this kind of enterprises, what is the potential? What's the upside of this? So of course that means that there is great potential if maybe, for example, they can be able to get some sort of incentives. We can discuss the kind of incentives that startups need as well as investors, but at least being able to get some form of incentives, be it grants or be it access to credit guarantee scheme, as well as getting some infrastructural support through getting access to incubation space, etc., etc. But also number three, most importantly, especially for ESOs or incubators, is the opportunity to really play a major role in terms of supporting the growth of startups. Yeah, so currently we don't see that happening as such, in the sense that we have, of course, incubators playing or supporting startups in the way they know how. So I think number one, the formation of ASSEK, and also number two, the anchoring of the bill would ensure that there's a systemic way through which incubators are able to interact with startups in a manner that we can be able to create a critical mass or a significant number of startups or pipeline of startups that are investable and are bankable, and of course that represents job opportunities for a lot of young Kenyans in Kenya.
All right, thank you, Victor. I mean, that's quite comprehensive. How about you, Gladys? What are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at if at all we were to see how businesses are supported from ideation to growth stage. There's a process, and the current market players, especially in Kenya and even within the East Africa region, there's this nuance to actually support more growth stage companies because they are considered less risky. But I see the provision of what is actually being proposed now. It's more of the government taking a step to anchor the startups, just as you're saying, Victor, to anchor the startups and create this enabling environment and facilitating this risky early stage startup phase of businesses, which most businesses, I was reading statistics of the number of new businesses that were registered between July and September during the COVID-19, they were up by 95%. And these are so many businesses that have come up during the COVID-19 period. And these are all considered startups. So if any of these startups needed funding and they wanted to go to a bank, none of them would listen. Or even if they wanted to go to an investor, none of them would listen. So we are seeing this being more of an opportunity for startups to actually get an opportunity to formalize their business, and for the other ecosystem players, be it an accelerator, one way in which they can actually benefit from this is get a pipeline of startups that have gone through a formal process that is recognized by government, and in such a way that they can actually have backing even to attract investors. I was also reading another report just about a month ago, and they were actually talking about investors who are looking to invest, say, for instance, in Kenya IT companies. For an investor who is, say, in the US or in the UK and they want to invest in a Kenyan company, one of the founders, or the only way they can actually invest is by one of the founders actually being an international. And you see, these are creating barriers for entry, and they're actually creating barriers for access to investment opportunities in Kenya, because the startups that exist currently, they have very great innovative ideas, but they're not anchored within a framework that recognizes them and gives them that ability to showcase who they are and be anchored in a system that can actually help them scale. So I see this being a way to actually formalize startups, and the fact that there's a provision for protecting of intellectual property, which is one thing. Right now, an incubation program will ask you, can you share with us a pitch? Can you share with us, your idea? And because someone is either seeking for funding or seeking for investor, someone will go out there and just speak about their business, spill all the beans, and this person is not protected. But with this bill, it actually proposes for protection of intellectual property and also patenting, especially for even internationally, meaning your idea can actually not be taken up internationally or protected. So they're good ideas, but now the opportunity for all ecosystem players is, how do we actually ensure it's anchored and it's protecting our startups and it's actually delivering value for ecosystem players?
I like that. I mean, some of the things people are saying is the introduction of this bill is going to stifle innovation because the registration process is quite cumbersome. And there's a double registration. There's the incubator, they have to register, and then the startup also has to register. How would you answer back to those who say that, because they're saying, oh, you're introducing complications in the registration? Personally, I feel the registration is necessary because it helps us identify the organizations that exist, and also helps us to put them in a specific category that maybe we can now lobby for and say they need additional support in X and Y. Proposing that frameworks need to be put in place for this provision and support of these organizations that identify as startups. What do you guys feel about the registration? Is it stifling the innovation process? Is it making the process even harder? Or
yeah, so I think around the conversations that we've had around the same has been that the amount of value that you're going to get if you are to get the badge of a startups are enormous. You can imagine, being able to access grants, being able to access, at least for ideation and prototyping kind of startups, being able to access credit through the credit guarantee scheme, where we hope, we can have other players other than financial institutions playing, have venture capitalists, have PE funds play, be in the conversation around the credit guarantee scheme. We are looking at, support in terms of, IP support, as Gladys has mentioned. So if you look at the value that startups are going to get, are proposed to get, is enormous. And if you look at the way even financial institutions operate, there has to be some skin in the game. So I don't think the idea is to stifle, but the idea is to try to sieve and only have people who are really very serious in terms of being able to operate as startups. You also don't want to have an open process that that is open for abuse. So it's just adding another KYC layer just to ensure that the guys who are coming in are very serious.
Okay.
And again, if you look at the registration of businesses in Kenya, it's actually very fast. It's done through e-citizen. So it's not like you're going to come to a physical space to be able to register. So it's just do your registration as a company, then apply for the status or the label of our startups. Also, you also don't want it to be very automatic that immediately you register, it's automatic that you want to participate in the startup bill, in the startup badge. Sorry. So you also want to create the democracy of I would want to join. If I don't want to join them, it's still open for you.
All right, thanks. I see someone in the comments says registration is necessary, but it should be simplified. I want to take a brief moment and introduce Professor Bitangen Demo, who's just joined us. Professor Bitangen Demo, over to you to introduce yourself, and then I can throw the first question over to you.
Yes, my name is Bitangen Demo, and thank you for inviting me. Audio. I think, yeah.
Prof, I think the audio, we can't hear you yet. Just try again. Now we can hear you. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I said, my name is Bitange Ndemo, and thank you for inviting me to join you in this important discussion.
All right, yeah, thank you, Prof. We wanted to start. We've just been discussing what we think about the startup bill, and I'd like to ask you the same question. What does the startup bill mean for you? And from you have context from a historical perspective of all the different things that have been done to support entrepreneurship in the country. Would you want to share a little bit of what the journey has been like? And now with the startup bill, what are your thoughts? Yeah, over to you, Prof.
Yes. I think earlier on we thought of trying to put everything in the legislation, and you realize the reason why we seek for legislation is because of dishonesty. That let's create a framework which would recognize the people who are genuine. I think what we forget that the space of innovation doesn't require a lot of regulatory mechanisms. This is because very easily stifle innovation completely by going that route. And number two is that members of parliament are very complex human beings. They are the ones who make the law. What will be the definition? Someone would stand up and say, the farmers who are beginning are startups. And then they would spoil your lunch for no reason, because they are looking at the resources that will be allocated there. If it is for protection of intellectual property, we should actually improve the Kenya, the intellectual property law in Kenya. The intentions are good, but most people don't understand how government works, because Parliament appropriates money, and when they appropriate money where they can create a lacuna, you would not even understand how the money was used. Meaning that they will take it and say, "Oh, we gave startups in Nyambene South where they were starting up growing carrots," so that you can't also define it in such a way that you discriminate other sectors. The best route we should have gone in this sector is to try at our level best and see that we streamline areas like the youth fund, the women's fund, can it fund this, then provide incentives to the private sector to invest in local startups. I say this because the only country that has developed a law around the space is Brazil, which has what they call mission-oriented policy. The startups bill here does not give room for innovation. I say this because a lot of innovation is required in government. People fear to do it because if they make a mistake, they are fired. That's how simple it is. If we had this bill prescribed like the Brazilians, that yes, we can allow a startup in government. If they make mistakes, we forgive them. If you take like a blockchain solution for the lands ministry and someone breaks through the system, you will be destroyed. You will be destroyed. But what people need to know is that the penal code is actually sufficient to protect us. The reason why the British never had a written constitution is to avoid such things like PPI. So we keep on legislating to the extent that we stifle ourselves from moving forward. Those are my words. If people think it's too harsh, it is the truth. Instead of coming to discover later on that a law like this, meant to be enabling, can actually stifle the process.
Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing some of those thoughts. I'd like to allow Gladys and Victor to respond to some of those thoughts. Over to you, Gladys.
Yeah, so I've actually seen a comment there that we should, to also add on to what Prof is saying about us enforcing the existing policies rather than us creating new policies, because this can actually stifle innovation. For me, my thoughts, the existing policies, especially that are around the entrepreneurial ecosystem, I'm thinking about the AGPO, all these other avenues that the government has actually tried to promote inclusion and try to just put in place structures and frameworks to create this entrepreneurial ecosystem that is that is moving forward. There's been progress, but one of the challenge I think is its implementation, and I know Professor is talking about the political thinking or the political interest behind some of these legislative frameworks. But then at this stage, I'm not able to comment really about the political goodwill, especially around this bill, based on what the bill actually proposes. These are good ideas, but it's about the ecosystem players, including the political class, implementing and just us implementing what has been proposed in the bill. The existing policies are there, but they're mainly targeted towards, say, women, towards youth, people with disability. They're also looking at the SMEs in general. But for me, I feel this bill is looking at startups as a specific subsector, which has not been explored. So we can keep creating legislative frameworks to accommodate existing challenges that happen within our ecosystem. It's just how do we actually implement and ensure that whatever has actually been put in writing, people can actually see the benefits to it.
I agree with you. I mean, we have to see what the benefits will come. And Professor is saying there's a lot of private interests with the bill. But here we're saying right now we need a base layer, and that is, can we recognize startups? I mean, what are your thoughts, Victor?
I agree, and to some degree I agree with Prof. I think for me, the question is, now that we are where we are right now, is I think one of the benefits or one of the outputs that for me I would appreciate from the bill is just getting that special recognition. Because it's one thing to say, okay, now let's work within existing framework or existing legal landscape to support startups in that way. The question is, that has not happened for the last maybe 5 years. So the question is, what can we do? Even if it's one step forward, can we be able to take that step? So I think even for me is out of the entire process, even just getting the mere fact that you're able to get recognition, and based on that recognition, it gives confidence to different stakeholders, such as investors who maybe would want to invest in the ecosystem, and probably they don't know how, and there's a lack of credibility in the ecosystem. So getting that recognition at the very least for me is very important, and also being able to get data, because one of the things that we also see in this ecosystem is the lack of data around who is doing what. Yeah, and again, different players have been trying to gather data, but again, data that is collected by private player is for their own consumption. How can we be able to ensure that as a nation we have open source data around around startup activities that we can collectively be able to make decisions around the same? To his point around the current affirmative action funds, the youth fund, the women fund. So one of the things I think, or one of my hypotheses or theories why they continue to fail is based on the what we call the SME sector structure in Kenya. So if you look at Kenya National Bureau of Statistics data, we have around top sectors in Kenya being wholesale retail, motor vehicle repair, food and accommodation. So those are the major kind of businesses that are in Kenya, and they're actually the ones driving the economy. If you look at maybe the mortality of the same sector, again, is very high. We are looking at a mortality rate of around 75% in the first 3 years. So these are the kind of entities that are applying for funding within the affirmative actions. And based on their very high mortality rate, it means that you cannot be able to sustain the funds. They cannot be able to repay those funds. Because if you're looking at maybe top sectors being wholesale retail, and they're getting their goods from China and at a low price or whatever, it means that you cannot be able to sustain a fund such an affirmative fund with business models that are not sustainable. So for me, I think startups represents a fresh way of accessing these funds. I agree. It could be that we could use those funds, but how can you be able to access those funds if you're not even recognized in law? So, you would say, let, for example, youth access the funds, or women access the funds, or even SMEs access the funds. So you don't have a legal standing as startups to be able to access such funds. So I think having some form of law, even if you don't go to the extent of giving IP support, etc., at the very least, for me, I think a huge plus out of this is just having that simple recognition and being able to plug into existing infrastructure within government.
Thank you so much, Victor. Professor, I want to come back to you briefly. Some of these laws that have been existing in the past that in Wholesome have aspects that support SMEs and startups, but at a very micro level have not been very successful. From your experience and engagement in this ecosystem as a whole, there are some clear gaps that still need to be met and filled to support the startup ecosystem. So are there gaps that you've identified, especially that you feel like this startup bill will or will not address?
Well, the moment you say you want to be recognized as startups, what is the definition of startup? That's where the problem begins. You can't say startups are people who have gone to school who can write software. A startup is any company that is just beginning. And that is where I fear members of parliament would exploit the opportunity and go back to the same problem we have with the small enterprises. If you looked at AGBO was very good, but people did not understand how to access it, because it looked like it's an elitist thing for people who understood how government works. It hasn't worked even in counties where they're supposed to take advantage of AGBO. The other point that I want to raise on this aspect, the more we continue to go as a section, women parliamentarians, disability parliamentarians, soon you are going to hear LGBT parliament, even them, they want to be recognized as a unit that is discriminated. It makes it very difficult for us to move forward. Recognition is the identity that you have, your identity card. And the moment you do something like a new startup and it moves on, that is recognition. I'll give you an example because I've done an article I've begun writing about startups. Just a few years ago, everybody remembers Little when it started. It sought a collaboration with Safaricom. And they started working. Eventually, they separated, but it moved on. The revenue for Little this year was 12 billion shillings. 12 billion shillings. Kamal didn't go asking that I want to be recognized. They developed the system, used social networks, used other networks to grow. So what we need, the discussion we need to have, how do we get into such networks? Silicon Valley, they didn't have a startup law, but they have done it. The more legislation, the more attractiveness we bring politicians into our space, and then we destroy innovation completely, because innovation requires no legislation. Actually, this is what happens when we talk about, if you look at the report we did on blockchain AI, we said we need at least to have sandboxes, because you need to play around and break some laws, rules. M-Pesa, we broke some laws to bring it to where it is. You are not telling me that when you get into the higher levels of innovation around finance area, with a startup law, that members of parliament will not come and stifle you and say, we don't understand this cryptocurrency, stop it. Then it is stopped. And yet, in 5 years, every national currency would be crypto. We don't want to be behind. We want to be at the cutting edge. And the more we get into the political side, the more we disenfranchise ourselves. And I've seen that happen. They are selfish people in parliament, and they would use the word startup to actually mess up the whole thing. What is happening now, you should actually understand that the entire SME sector, MSME, is being disrupted. Who are disrupting it? Small companies, like bigger companies are getting there. Even global companies are getting into the space. Very soon, you are not going to hear micro and small enterprises as a pain, because in entrepreneurship, you succeed where there is the greatest problem. That is what we should be saying. How can we break through this problem? Now we are living, Google comes, provides everybody with an addressing point, they collect their data, then we begin asking, where is the data? They are collecting data from us and we are seeing it. We are saying, no, let us be the ones having rudimentary CPS locationing so that we are able to collect the data from our people and know who is dealing in tomatoes, who is dealing with whatever. South Africa is selling us eggs in Nairobi. We can't organize Moranga to sell eggs to Nairobi. Those are the opportunities. Those are the areas we need to ask. Actually, people need to ask, where do I put the money? Where do I put my skills now? We have failed to have many of these discussions, so that instead of saying some of us start businesses which are not productive, we are the ones who do business that are productive. It's actually not the correct way of doing it. We focus our energies in helping one another and forget about the political side.
Thank you so much, Prof. I mean, you share so many interesting insights. One of the things that's coming out as I hear you speak is a big conversation that we hardly talk about is a lot of our young startups need money and sort of capital to help them boost to the next level. So in the absence of this kind of recognition, how do we help them get the backing that they need to get the capital that they're looking for? A second conversation. Yeah, sorry, yes, Prof.
They can't get the money. And that is what he said, that the government is not able to repay the youth fund or women fund. The moment you go into startup specific, the term startup will be defined as anybody who doesn't have money, who is starting something. And then you have the same number of people requiring the money. So the question we should have asked, how do we fund the young people? Can we get venture builders? Can we talk to universities to develop ventures for young people and they come out of the rut? That is a different conversation.
I'd like to bring that up, actually, now that you bring it up. Victor, the startup bill provisions for a de-risk fund in the miscellaneous provisions. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so thanks, Prof. I think those are very wonderful insights that you've shared there. Again, from where I sit, I'm thinking, and he's given two examples. Number one is, the Little Cup, as well as Silicon Valley. And I think maybe just getting context around the same is very important, because if you look at developed countries, they already have some minimum infrastructure that is able to support them without legislation for them to scale and for them to be able to get a critical number of startups, to reach unicorn stage, etc. The question is, if you're a university student, or you're just an entrepreneur who, would want to, develop or start a venture in the name of a startup, how best can you be able to, grow your venture, and how can we, as a country, create a critical number number of critical mass of startups to be able to make some significant change. It's good that I think the last decade or the last 5 years, we've had 1 or 2, 3 or 4 startups coming through. But the question I think I'm asking myself is, how can we be able to scale that? How can we be able to scale that process up? So I think one of the things that I see the startup bill doing is being a conversation starter. I don't think it's an end by itself. If the bill wasn't there today, we'd not be having this discussion. So I think it's the start of a conversation, and I think it's good that we're able to get a different perspective in terms of how can we, from a bird's point of view, be able to catalyze the startup ecosystem. And for me, what I think the principle that I work with is, for me, innovation and being different is not a factor of just creating 1 or 2 very good companies. Is innovation, and this is we've learned with China, is a question of increasing your volume of creativity, your volume of ideas. Of course, there might be low tech, low value ideas, but out of that, you're able to get 1 or 2 or 3 very good ideas. One of the things that we relate, Albert Einstein is the law of relativity. That's the only thing we remember Albert Einstein with. But if you know that, if you read through his history, you'd realize that he had written he had put out a lot of publications, and out of the many publications, it's only one that came out as genius. So I think for us, I think the general idea of the bill is to create a critical mass of startups. Because one of the challenges we also see from an investor point of view is they come to Kenya or they come to Africa with some minimum threshold in terms of investment. So there is a level at which they can't go below in terms of, and it will not make an economic sense. So I think for us, or from where I sit also, is can we be able to start creating a critical mass of startups to be able to reach a point where you are visible globally, or you're visible in Africa, then you can be able to attract investments. And one of the things I think that is not very clear from the people who are commenting on the bill is that the definition is already there, and the definition is not an SME. If you look at one of the clauses, I can't remember, it's very clear what or who a startup is. It has to be an institution that maybe is either founded or based on tech. It's a company that maybe is less than 8 years, and it's a raft of characteristics that we are trying to look and differentiate it from any other business. Because again, startups are very and significantly very different from SMEs, and it's just a question of trial. Yeah, so I agree with Prof. In terms of some of the ideas that he has, but I think for me this should be a continuous conversation. And it should not be that we need to stop this and do another. The question that maybe I would ask all of us is, how best can we be able to move forward given the situation that we find ourselves in?
Thank you so much, Victor. And that's the conversation we need to ask. Gladys, you work in an advisory capacity, especially with BILAM East Africa and other organizations that are SME in nature. The funding issue is coming up quite a bit. How do you advise them to seek funding in this case? And what provisions do you think policy has a role in which it can play to support small industries and organizations to find funding?
Okay. So mainly when when businesses are enrolling in some of these programs or are seeking, say, technical assistance in some of these institutions, be it support programs or enterprise support organizations, their first motive is to get funding. But what we've realized is you need to get funding, but with a certain type of support, because you walk to a bank or you walk to an investor, the investor will ask you, what do you have for me? And so if you're not packaged properly, there is no way you're going to get that funding. There's no way you're going to get that financing. And so and we've realized there's a very big gap, especially with our financial institutions. That's why we have angel investors and we have all these investors who are coming in place, or even people who are using crowdfunding to be able to accommodate the missing middle, those who cannot afford financing from the bank and those who cannot raise money, bootstrapping, they cannot raise money from their family and friends. So most people are actually designing programs that can offer financial and non-financial support. And that's the only way to ensure sustainability, because you'll be given money, but what will you use the money for? Most entrepreneurs have an idea of what the money will be used for, but with the advisory, what we do is we help you structure. This is the amount of money you need. These are the priorities you need to address in your business for you to scale. Because this funding, you'll not get funding forever. You're getting funding to help you pivot, or you're getting funding for you to for you to scale your business. So we realize that, especially for startups, it's been very difficult because they don't actually fall. I don't think the startups actually fall in the target for the missing middle, because they have an idea, they have not packaged it. And that's why we have incubator programs that are supposed to offer these startups with office spaces, facilities, with mentors and all these networks to help them package their business, so that even as they're advancing or they're moving from an idea stage, they have a prototype that can actually be bankable, for lack of a better word. So I think that's the support. And in any business venture, be it even you're a small business that is trying to go seek funding, you have to follow the same process, because the legislative framework, especially in Kenya, around access to finance, there is no shortcut to it. There are documents you need to provide. There are guarantees. You need to provide a guarantee if you're going to get a financing from the bank. And so all these institutions have been trying to create this enabling environment to ensure that, and they've been going to the government and asking them, can you facilitate this access to finance for us to be able to support these small and growing businesses within the ecosystem? And through the bill, it's offering startups more of a credit scheme guarantee, and it's also offering to facilitate fiscal and non-fiscal, support for investment, and trying to ensure that these startups can actually get global recognition, so that they can actually attract global investors. And I think it's a great move, and all they need is just that place that they can be incubated to package their business for them to be bankable.
All right, thank you so much. I like that you bring about the fact that there is also foreign investment that's needed. Prof, I want to bring you back to this conversation and just rope in the diaspora. They contribute a significant amount of money to the GDP of the country. And we believe that if they also channel some of that funding to support young innovations that are coming up, there would be a big boom in the country, and we could see a lot more scale in the innovations in the startup ecosystem. What do you think the role the people in the diaspora should play in financing and guaranteeing for startups? So, and do you think we can use this bill to create avenues for some of the funding from the diaspora to be channeled through this? Yeah.
Much of the diaspora money goes to consumption, and it's you send money to your parents, whatever. But if we build viable enterprises, they will invest in them. They will invest them. And I think what we have not done in detail is to look at the biographies of people like Reed Hastings, Mark Randolph, those who started Netflix, and Jeff Bezos with Amazon. Jeff Bezos used to deliver books by himself. And people started seeing he's making money, it began to make sense. People need to trust you. And I talk to so many young people who are doing their startups, and I say, just go around. If you came to sell me the idea and I buy the idea, then I'm your first customer. But you find people develop a pitch deck and there is zero revenue and they're asking for funding. Even government won't trust you. So we actually need to create networks and say, I'll give a bit of this. And you come when you are pitching and you say, well, we have 50 customers and this is what they are saying about the product. This is what these Americans, they didn't have money. But once they started selling, people began to invest in them. The whole issue about our discussion is lack of trust. If we are able to deal with the trust issue, even everybody in the diaspora would put their money in our startups here.
Okay, the issue is lack of trust. How do we build trust? Any one of you guys want to take that up?
Yeah, so I think even in e-commerce, I think the challenge that we are having currently in terms of unlocking greater value in the e-commerce space is trust, and I agree with that. I think maybe a better, maybe a different way of looking at it is how can we be able to build a credible investment vehicle or framework where maybe that can act as an intermediary between startups and SMEs as well as diaspora. Because I think if you're to look at such a model and at scale, then of course you can't have a situation where maybe someone in the diaspora, looking at different profiles of different startups. So I think maybe the way you do unit trust, where you just pay a certain amount and you are given a guaranteed return, maybe that's a model maybe that we could explore in terms of having some framework around the Capital Markets Authority, which of course is the body that looks at public investment, and have that money being traded somewhere around such a platform. Because again, CMA gives a credible platform and can be able to give trust, and they can be able to give some sort of social guarantee that your money is not going to be lost. Then that's from the supply side. Now, from the demand side is trying to be able to organize, startups being able to be able to access that kind of money. I don't know, maybe get a board or someone or some committee that is able to vet different applications coming forward. But I think it's having some systems around the same, a credible system with a credible body, maybe can be able to create the trust and the necessary institutional backing to to enable diaspora to send their funds.
All right, thank you. Gladys, might you have anything to add on that topic, or should I move on to the very next segment? Yeah.
No, I'm just thinking trust is two-way. So do the startups trust the investors? Do the investors trust the startups? So I think, and now with the government, the other day the government was announcing that it's going to actually check for every new person. They're going to actually go deep and check, the database of investors, and to ensure that the money that is coming into the country is not illegal money. And let's say you've registered, they're going to give you a grace period of 3 years to do this. So I think it's how do you actually create a space where it's an enabling environment, because that's the core, where there's trust and there's transparency, because that's the essence of governance, and good governance is about integrity and transparency. So if for the startups can actually own up to that, these are our systems, this is our structures, and this is our information, and you're going to give you as is. And on the other case, the investors or even any other party within the ecosystem is actually honest from the beginning and transparent, and there's this essence of integrity. I think that's a good point. People have set up standards to promote this, but they're not really at the startup level.
All right, thank you so much for all those opinions. For the people who are joining us virtually, yes, Professor.
Which made a very good comment, where government is beginning to ask. Last year, Kenya got almost close to $1 billion in terms of support to the startup. Government is now saying we need to vet that money so that we see whether it is illegal money. The same very year, almost $1 trillion left Africa into Western banks. You have never heard Britain saying, we want to vet that money. This is what I'm telling you, that whenever you bring in government, you end up in problems, because people are sending money to build the startups here. We are getting other requirements. You can't even get the money because there is something called AML. But when people steal money from Africa to the rest of the world, you've never ever had US stop any money, or Europe itself stop any money. These are the areas where we need to debate.
I mean, yeah, I think that's quite interesting, actually. All right, thank you so much, Professor. So let's talk about one more issue that's quite serious, and that's intellectual property. I think one of the things that policy is relevant for is creating enabling environments, but also protecting our own. And we need to be able to help young innovators be able to protect their innovations through IP. Are there provisions in this current bill that support IP, or which other legislations exist that support IP that innovators should be aware of? Because we're having a general policy discussion, it's good to have like the whole big picture. Any of you guys want to go first?
Yeah, so I think one of the areas, I think, because when we were starting the process, we had a lot of conversations with a lot of startups. And one of the key issues other than financing was the issue around IP. And with the idea, with the backdrop being that a lot of startups in Kenya go into this not policy hackathon, but go through this hackathon where they pitch and present ideas. And for some reasons, you find that maybe you win or you don't win the hackathon. And these ideas have a way of finding themselves out of the ecosystem and being further developed in other countries. So the whole idea was, how can we be able to protect our startups in terms of the ideas that they generate, and how can we be able to modernize our IP law to be able to cater for 21st century challenges. So I think for me, that's the context under which I think we should be viewing IP. IP is a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's not good to protect. It's not good to protect early. Sometimes it's good to have open conversations and maybe try to look at protecting your IP much later on, because sometimes especially in Africa where we don't have too much infrastructural support, ETC is you might be able to protect then, but even if you protect, you lose the value of collaborating with other stakeholders who would have helped you to, really develop the idea and be able to make more revenue, as opposed to you closing the idea early enough.
Okay, but when we put it that way, then there are already existing institutions like KIPI that are tasked with the mandate of helping young innovators secure their innovations. Where are the gaps there? Because already this is existing. Why do we need to further reinforce the whole idea of IP? Gladys, any thoughts?
I think there is lack of knowledge. Say, for instance, and the nature of innovators, they wake up with an idea, it's good, they share it with some of their friends, and their friends are like, I think this is the next big idea. And the next thing you know, they are registering a business or they are pitching it to someone else. So I think it's the nature of innovation, but also the fact that most people don't actually understand, if I have an idea, for me to actually patent it, where should I go? And if I go to KIPI, will they ask me for money? What are the costs of patenting? How long does it take? There are requirements that you need to follow for you to actually patent your idea. So I think it's just the whole consumer knowledge on how to go about the process. And I think Prof has talked about this. The intellectual property rights are not developed in Kenya to a stage that they can actually be able to compete with patenting or intellectual IPs globally. So as much as we are saying that this bill proposes for recognition of IPs globally, do they actually match up to those standards? And so I think it's an idea of the innovators or even the startups being aware of what patenting is all about, what is the process of patenting, are there any cost implications? And at all, if you patent, what does that mean for you? Because I know there are different structures on how you can actually go about it. So I think that is just my thought about it. And with innovation comes with research and development. You may patent an idea today, then tomorrow you wake up, it's advanced. So it's just about the whole innovation journey. But I think the whole process and the whole understanding of what intellectual property is in Kenya and it being able to match up to the global standards, I think is very key.
All right, thank you so much, Gladys. Professor, do you want to add anything on the IP discussion?
Yes. If you are on Google, you can go to Kenya Copyright Board and see that they have proposed an intellectual property bill 2020. And then we are putting some protection in the startup bill. Then we are keeping. So what we are doing is we are giving lawyers meat to argue on anything because we are overloading with the legislation. Nobody has talked about the new bill on intellectual property, and the copyright board is actually asking people to make comments. So these are the confusion. Once you get this, lawyers get very happy. And
I think maybe just,
yeah.
I mean, I think maybe just to add, I think if you look at specifically the bill, it doesn't in any way try to create any form or to reinvent the wheel. I think the idea being, the principle that I think that has been mentioned is that startups need some form of protections, some form of IP protection, and the reference has been made to all the IP laws that are in existence. And I think the more an important issue I think that I think maybe we should be looking at is again giving input towards the IP bills to ensure that they are able to maybe to look at the issues that startups go through. But I don't think specifically the startup bill talks about how to go about protection. The idea was because of the complexity of the problem, no complexity of getting a part or IP protection, as well as the cost. So I think where the bill talks, what the bill talks about is how can maybe, for example, startups be facilitated to ensure that they are able to protect their IP property through and through. And I think that that mandate has been given to the Kenya Innovation Agency to find a way of ensuring that startups are not exposed to lawyers or people who maybe would be predatory or take advantage of them, but how can startups be able to easily access the IP support in Kenya? I think that's what is in the bill.
I like that.
I did not want to bring in, I'm not negative, but a deluge of legal frameworks puts us in a dilemma. We have Kenya Innovation Agency, we have research fund, which is separate. Actually, people practically trying, you need to do research in order to innovate, but then you have two different institutions. Eventually, you find that the research people are holding to their research money. It's not going to Kenya Innovation Fund. We have the copyright people not making reference to the other people. So I think we need to get our act together and do what we really want to do.
I want to open it up to the people in the comment in the joining us virtually. I mean, do you have any comments on this section of IP and the role IP, how it should be factored in the startup bill conversations on any other legislation that exists? Are there any comments in the chat section? Send them and we'll read them out. Thank you so much, all of you, for saying those comments. I mean, one of the things, as sitting in the ASSEK board, we are supporting especially the enablers. And here we have the hubs and the incubators and the accelerators coming in as a support structure to help the innovators, follow this pipeline of this is how to protect yourself, this is how to secure investment, this is how to network, and actually being an agent of providing attraction for those networking opportunities. Where do you think the gap is? Have the hubs been fully covered? Not just the hubs, but the incubators, the accelerators, have they been fully covered in this policy bill in terms of they need support too to be able to keep the doors open?
Yeah, so I think maybe just to go and just taking up from the last comment that Prof had, and I don't think in any way from where I sit, I see any you being negative, and I think it's good that you're able to enrich the conversation. And I think as a country, we constantly need to have hard conversations, and I think it's that's very important and that's very good. Yeah. So that's number one. Number two is if you look at we've done a couple of research around, and even GSMA and different players have done research around incubation hubs in Kenya, and the general bit is that a lot of hubs have sustainability issues. Yeah, in the sense that very few of them, because they don't have enough pipeline and we're not getting enough, startups exiting, it means that they're not able to generate internal revenues to be able to support to have their own programs. So a lot of incubation programs rely on external parties to come run programs, and they're able to make revenue out of that. But that's not sustainable. So I think one of the major issues that maybe I think the bill addresses is trying to be able to be inclusive in terms of, really trying to mainstream incubators and give them a lifeline in terms of, being or taking or playing a bigger part in the lifestyle or in the lifespan of a startup. So I'm assuming that if, like, for example, I think David in the morning was talking about Makueni having a Makueni County Hub. That's an opportunity for, for government, although Prof saying government is dangerous, but at least we are seeing Makueni County as an example, being a beacon in terms of, setting up an incubation center and trying to rally different stakeholders within to be able to help startups in Makueni. And I think for me, that's, even though, you might say, government doesn't have the competency to run such an incubation program, the thing is they have done something and they continue to do something. And for me is, even the little things that are being done, can we be able to rally around the same and try to make them work as much as possible?
All right, Gladys, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so looking at, say, other ecosystem players, the hubs, the incubators, and the accelerators, etc. So what actually the bill has provided, it's provided a provision for the incubators mainly, and the key role they play in advancing the ecosystem and in advancing startup growth. So it's provided key roles on this is what incubators need to do, this is the mandate they need to do, this is the requirements that incubators need to meet. And I think it's a big step toward formalization of incubation and how incubators actually support startups. And as we say, nowadays, how things are done, even within our ecosystem, incubation hubs are very random and they're not really regulated. So there's a lot of exploits at some point to some of the startups, and also the fact that their governance structures are not really they're not really regulated. You find that there's this lack of sustainability, and startups end up suffering at the end of the day. So the bill actually provides the provision for incubators specifically, but then also looking at other ecosystem players along the line, be it accelerators, investors, and venture capitalists, etc. We see that by creating this initial framework, it will actually be able to advance the ecosystem along the path from idea stage to early stage to growth stage. We see there being a continuum in terms of growth of startups, and actually those who are in the later stage of the ecosystem can actually benefit from what will have been done at this initial stage, because this initial stage is one that is not supported currently, and that's where most of the challenges are. So once we actually rally around formalizing startups and formalizing incubation, I think some of the ecosystem challenges will have been addressed. And in terms of the county governments, we are seeing the fact we did a study on the rural, trying to assess how is business development support services in rural areas. And we did this study in several countries, and we realized there's a very big gap, because most incubators are mostly set in the urban centers, and I think I've mentioned this. And so you find that those businesses or those SMEs or those SGBs that are in the rural sector, they're suffering. And because they don't have an ecosystem really to support them, they don't even have a peer network. But with the decentralization of this thing, with the decentralization of incubation and business development support, people can actually be able to access these services with the same quality, because county governments have been mandated to ensure that the incubation hubs within their counties are to a globally competitive scale, to ensure that startups receive the same benefits that any other startup is receiving countrywide.
Oh, thank you so much. Some of the comments that are coming in is that, one second, Prof, and then you can continue. Someone is saying that all these agencies concerned with IP need to synchronize their mandates. Do we agree with that? And then over to you, Professor. Yes.
Yes, let me say one thing. I had the opportunity to travel almost globally to look at the ecosystems around this. If you go to Bangalore, the ecosystem, we went to Israel, the ecosystem, which is one of the best, which actually we copied and developed the ICT authority. What the Israelis have is what is called the Israeli Innovation Authority. This authority now thus calls for proposals from everybody. Even a farmer can go propose. And then they evaluate multiple people to see the potential of that and actually supports that proposal for a number of years. Then they have active innovation within the Army. When they see you are doing very well, they take you to the Innovation Authority, and then they get international collaborations, the authority itself, and actually grow you. They do the venture build. When you have the potential, a good idea, calling for proposals and getting the very best ideas which can go far. If you look at Silicon Valley, the government has what they call small business administration as a bank that supports innovation, where when you have a good idea, a wonderful idea, they will give you money to survive as you build it. And then they have an academic ecosystem to help you to grow. Now, if we just did this and say we bring this bill forward and sit down and say, now we are going to see innovations, it won't work. It won't work because the presumption is that, well, what we are lacking is this. But what we are lacking is a complete ecosystem. The academia has to come in, then the financial private, because Google went through SPA, Facebook went through SPA when they were not making money. That's how they made the money. So we need to think it much more broadly than just to say we have a startup bill, which doesn't have the support mechanism. And that's why I was saying, let us look. You can go online and look at Israel Innovation Authority. What does it have? They have all these programs, they have international collaborations, which they are in control of. Then you have the teams that look at those proposals in a way to see how to build the venture. We must get into that space of helping startups build the venture itself because they don't have that capacity. It is not.
Can I ask something, Prof?
Yes, yeah.
Just around the same thing. I mean, you're already in academia right now. What are some of the things academia is doing to bridge the gap to support the startups? Maybe could you point out some of the existing training and capacity building initiatives that are available from the academia side to bridge the gap with the startups, at least on that end?
It's not the gap. When you have, I said Google, I said Yahoo, I said Cisco, I said all these companies came from Silicon Valley, supported by professors from Stanford, from UC Berkeley, and around there. All those people are in the list, and they will get some piece of it because they are building something big. So everybody has got, everybody has an incentive of working to see it develop. Here, academia, they are selling beans and potatoes there, and they have all this knowledge here, which they are not bringing to young people. So we needed somebody to bring everybody together and say, do research on translation, language translation, for example, in AI, machine learning. So they come with their capabilities and develop a product. You know, we are going to have a product on adaptive learning, and we take it to the people. You have already customers, people will talk about it. And then now we have a bank, which National Bank, for example, instead of KCB having bought it, it would have become our bank for that sector to grow the enterprises. This is what we call it small business administration, where you actually go with a proposal. You don't go there and say, somebody from Mombasa got a loan and I also need a loan. That is what you want the politicians to begin to do, to say many people from this region are getting loans, our people need to get. Then we kill creativity. Yeah. So I've made references to so many organizations I hope people would make reference and see what is happening in other places. The same is happening in Malaysia, the same in Singapore.
I want to bring it back to Victor and Gladys. In the comment section, actually, if they can expand it a little bit for us. Professor, they're saying you're giving so many foreign examples. Isn't there anything good coming also from here?
Well, we developed the ICT board. They lost the direction. That we borrowed the idea from Israel by doing it. It didn't go to work with those people. They are, well, I don't want to say a lot more.
All right, now over to Victor and Gladys. What do you guys have to say about this?
One of the things that we also realize, I think, from the bill, again, is a lot of people are asking, why is it that there is a lot of references towards incubators? And one of the things which I think was very deliberate was to ensure that, because what Prof is saying, it's easier for, maybe, for example, to do an application to one authority, maybe, for example, in Israel. So the question is, how can you practically adopt that in the Kenyan context? So the best point of reference is, instead of one organization, whether it is ICT, Ministry of ICT or Ministry of Industry and Trade, getting all national application, it becomes almost like a KCPE or KCC process. It becomes too complex. So how can you be able to replicate the same system within the Kenyan context? And one of the anchor institutions that can actually be able to evaluate and give or vouch for a startup would be an incubator, because they already are working with incubators at the county level. So either a county working with in collaboration with the hub in the region. Like I'll give an example, like Sote Hub work in Taita Taveta. And one of the biggest challenges they have is collaborating with the county, because they don't have an existing framework for collaboration. You either come in as a supplier or a PPP, which neither of them works for them. So I think that having a framework that spurs that conversation is important, and riding on that infrastructure to be able to maybe sieve these very good ideas. Because in Kenya, we have trust issues. You can't just have an open check where you say, send an application and we'll vet the best idea. So getting a vouching mechanism, almost like a granny model of sorts, where the hub in your county is able to go through, help you grow your idea. And if that idea is good enough, then let it compete at a national level. So I think there's some level through which maybe the draft bill is able to look at that. Yeah. So, and for me, the question is, how can we be able to make things work for Kenya? Because it's one thing to say things are working elsewhere, but the reality in Kenya is extremely, extremely different. So how can we be able to use the existing infrastructure, the little resources that we have, to make sure that things work? Number three is, of course, one of the things that, one of the principles that is overarching in terms of the entire process is anchoring this process in the triple helix model, which I know the good Prof is aware about, where we try to match the different both TVET and universities that are working in the county, and having a conversation together as a county, as university, as well as private sectors who are within that county, and their startups solving their problems at the county level. So I think there's some degree to which we've been able to adopt some of these best practices without doing a direct copy and paste. And my prayer and hope is that it works.
So the framework you needed was the incentives to TVETs and universities to work with startups. And then we have a national call for proposals, which would come from every county. And that call for proposals have people with integrity to vet it, and which everybody can say, actually, that was better than the other one. That's how we can do. Still, it goes back to trust. Because some people would say, hatujachaua moja kutoka Taita, and let us take this.
I mean, yeah, that's the framework that's called for. And I think all the startup bill is saying is set up this framework for support, set up this framework for funding, set up this framework for IP issues. Gladys, I mean, you've been hearing what they're saying.
Then you end up spending all the money. That is why our wage bill is so high and nothing results on the ground. Where you
Prof,
have
are you
to,
saying that it'll result in a lot of people being hired and nothing getting done?
and
Or
nothing getting done? Yes, yeah.
I think this whole idea of decentralization of ecosystem support at the county level, I think this will be one of the biggest win, especially if at all this bill will be implemented as is. And looking at this, I'm thinking, if I'm a startup from my county, and of course, my county has a CDP, it has a county development plan. As a startup, I know the challenges within my county. I know the opportunities within my county. So I'm innovating with the challenges within my county. So even with all this, say we call for this national application of innovations in terms of priority, especially at a county level, it will the startups that will be supported are those startups that most probably are addressing the county level challenges, because there's no way that you're going to fund an innovation that is supporting a challenge in another county, because I think that's the whole essence of decentralization, of ensuring that startups are actually solving problems at the county level. And when it comes to say selection or even getting these ideas, you'll find, especially at the rural areas, the way the same way you'll advertise for, say, a call for proposal in Nairobi is different from the way you'll advertise a call for proposal in, say, Makueni or Kikuyu or another rural county, because the infrastructure is different. The culture is different. How people consume knowledge is different. So I think it's the whole idea of how can you be able to utilize and foster this culture of innovation and entrepreneurship at the county level to ensure that the ecosystem is benefiting, the local community, the people within the county are benefiting, and the county can actually say, okay, fine, this innovation has contributed to our CDP.
Prof, I know you have a burning comment, but I have something to say there.
Let me add a small thing, because you touched on Makueni. Makueni have got right now a very good health wallet, which would not just do work in Makueni, but the entire country, the entire Africa, the entire world. That we can't say let's do innovation for us. Economically, it is not visible, because then you can't scale, then outsiders who would understand that would destroy you. Let us help those in Makueni to think local, but act globally. This is the solution, but can it be scaled? Because the whole thing you want to look at is, how can we have scalable startups? Not to please people that, oh, we are going here to solve bananas sales in Kisi. It won't help them. It will just die, because there is no demand for that globally. Let them think locally, but act globally.
I like that. I mean, I was going to talk about scale, and a lot of things we do here are easily replicable across the East Africa market and Africa at large. I'm noticing we're pressed for time, so I think now is the best time to have the closing remarks. If this bill was to become a law, what would you be expecting? What are your personal expectations of this bill should it become a law? Given all this conversation that we've had about the challenges that currently exist, the challenges of scaling as well, the gaps in IP and the over legislation where a lot of laws are replicated. Let's assume now the bill is passed and becomes a law. What then should anybody expect from the ESOs to the startups to anyone else in the country at large that's interested in this startup bill? Who would like to go first?
I could go.
All right.
I think for me is what I've learned from this entire process is the startup bill making process is an open canvas, and it's open for critique, open for conversation and contribution. Of course, even if you are to do the very best that you can and even put out the best possible legislation, you can never guarantee 100% success. So for me, I think my takeout would be at least if we can be able to have startups recognized as different from being SMEs, get some sort of incentives to catalyze, some significant numbers getting funding, which of course will have a direct impact on job creation, etc. I think for me that would be good. And again, is just having all hands on deck in terms of just being able to contribute. Because one of the things that we see is there's a process going on. There's a lot of criticism outside of the entire process. I don't know how many people have been able to do submissions and give their dissenting opinion around the same. Because I think, good or bad, any criticism is good to be able to further a process and to improve it.
All right, thank you, Victor. How about you, Gladys?
Yes, so for me, the bill is a good starting point, and it's a good canvas to begin the conversation. As you said, we not have had this conversation with the bill not there. But then I think one of the improvements that need to be made into it is the explicit recognition of ecosystem players beyond the startups, the incubators, and say the county and national government. Like who are the beneficiaries of the bill beyond that? So I think that would really make it clear so that someone can actually know how to plug in and add value, because in any entrepreneurial ecosystem, the private sector players really are big contributors, especially to enhancement of policies and to ensure that, policies actually make progress. So I think as much as it's a draft bill, there have been explicit conversations or mentions or contributions of key sector players beyond those that are mentioned. And then second of all is just trying to ensure that it's in a way that even startups can be able to know this is the starting point. So I register, then what? So I think it's very clear for that to really be explicit as well. But I think it's a good starting point, and most importantly, it's the goodwill. I think anything can be written on paper, but then it's the goodwill of the implementers in the ecosystem, and sometimes, of course, the government framework is supposed to create this culture of innovation, and it's also supposed to drive development, especially in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. But it's the ecosystem players who day to day are with these startups, who day to day are solving the problems of the startups. They have to have a voice and have goodwill to actually support the ecosystem grow, and not because this is not a government initiative. The government is just creating an enabling environment and creating a legal framework for everyone to play a role in growing the entrepreneurial ecosystem, especially in innovation. So I urge everyone to just be on board, and I think there's opportunity for people to send in their submissions on areas of revisions that need to be made, and of course, all the ecosystem players as well.
Thank you so much. Prof, your closing remarks on this. Should the bill become a law? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you have a very strong team there, and they've done a good job. Unfortunately, the bill is in the wrong house. The Senate focuses on county. So they are going to give money, and they say, give us the formula. They will spend a couple of years to talk about that formula of allocation to every county. And you will not, the Ministry of Communication is actually a national thing. You would have a problem of implementation of that. I think the best they do is they withdraw it from Senate and take it to Parliament. That is the only way it can do something. But the way it is, I would rather we have another framework.
Well, the bill is going to be a money bill, and it will be introduced in Parliament as well. Victor, I know you have some comments around that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the process, of course, because the conversation started with Honorable Senator Sakaja, so I think that it was only natural for it to be discussed at the Senate, and we've consistently been able to communicate through all platforms that the bill is going actually to Parliament, and we already have set a date for having an expert conversations around money bill issues. Issues to do with tax, issues to do with IP, and we already in conversations with guys at National Treasury. We already in conversation with people at the Capital Markets Authority, IP experts, all different stakeholders that we thought would be important to have that conversation. KIPI, etc., just to be able to have everyone on the table and have the same discussion. Yeah. So like I said, it's I think the idea is You don't throw an idea together with its bathwater just because it's not working. If we remove the bill, then what? We'll still go back to status quo. And I think for us, and for me, where I see it is whatever little progress that we have, can we be able to rally around the same and move the conversation forward?
All right. Thank you so much.
I think we think about business development services.
Okay.
So the money, business development services, that's how you can help the ventures in Wundani, the ventures in Meru, whatever. But just talking about the startup bill, that's what we don't have the common understanding. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Gladys had mentioned about business support services. Do you want to just bring it up again before I wrap up, or in terms of how business support services can be scaled into the counties from your experience working with the hubs?
Yes, first of all is identifying what type of support does a business actually need, and structuring your support, the non-financial support in, structuring the business to achieve a certain level of growth. And then from there, now you can actually support them. So I think business development support is helping the business access markets, linking them to the right networks, the right markets, because these are key things, linking them to technology, and as well as providing them, support services that they can actually be able to leverage to grow their business, because these are non-financial support that businesses actually require for them to be stable and for them to be bankable, to enhance access to capital and financing.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all my panelists and for all of those who are joining us virtually. We've had a very engaging conversation about policies and how they create enabling environments. And we did a deep dive into the startup bill. We hope that you'll be able to join us to continue these conversations. I mean, we noticed that the startup bill is not the only bill affecting our ecosystem. There's other bills like the data protection bill, amongst others. So keep engaging, keep chatting. Follow us on the hashtag ASSEK 2020. We'd like to keep this conference discussions going on beyond just this event. From today, from the panelists in the morning, we've covered all the different topics, from how the ESOs how they work regionally, the gaps that have been existing, and now to how policy can enable the framework. Thank you so much to the ASSEK Organizing Committee for organizing this event. And from this panel, we'd like to say thank you so much. We look forward to engaging with you virtually. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Thank you so much, Anne, and your amazing panel, Victor, Gladys, and Bitange. 9 hours, wow. 5 panels, 25 speakers. We're really thankful. And 100+ viewers. Thank you for being with us. A dream that was imagined almost 2 years ago on harmonizing the ecosystem, and look at us now. Constantly stamping the word, we're talking about partnerships, collaborations, and co-creation. One voice. And on top of it, we had an MOU between Countrywide Hub Network and ASSEK. I think we should really clap for that, even though how few we are here. Thank you. I really want to thank these people. I really want to thank JZ. JZ, thank you so much for making this happen. This wouldn't be here if we wouldn't be here if JZ didn't support us and didn't believe in ASSEK. I want to thank the members, our 50+ members. We thank you so much for being with us from morning till now, and even as you continue this journey. I want to thank the board who have been tirelessly working to ensure that this has come into fruition. And of course, I want to thank our secretariat who have been constantly sleepless nights, have been here since 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. Thank you so much. I want to thank also as well Archer Digital for ensuring that you guys were able to see us. And even though we had a few hiccups because of technology, but we've been here with you since morning. I want to thank also events by Jaiko and as well as Kempinski. But last but not least, when ASSEK came into fruition, there was a specific body that came together and was helping us in registering ASSEK, and this is Bowman's Law. Really want to thank you, because we wouldn't be standing here and wouldn't be ASSEK if it wasn't for you. Things to look out for. Next week, we have the Lake Basin Innovation Investment Week. ASSEK will be having a panel on the 18th from 2 to 3. ASSEK will be running a panel on strengthening the ESO community nationally. And as well, please join us on 2nd December for annual AGM. Thank you and have a nice evening.